طيب, and I want to introduce the first speaker لو سمحت Mr. Sam, all right? Without further delay, I wanted to say two things as well. Please keep your mobiles silent, and at the same time, you will have a barcode. This barcode is for e-certificates. اللي حابب يحصل على e-certificates لاحقا للايفنت هذا تقدر تعمل سكاننج وتعبي معلوماتك عشان تحصل على شهادة للحضور. مش الآن, لاحقا, بس أنت عندك الباركود هذا مبدئيا. طيب, let me introduce our first speaker for today, and he's definitely a keynote speaker. Mr. Sam Ashampong is a fellow of SIPS. I have met him like 15 years ago, Sam. And back then we were discussing what do we need to do for Jordan as far as procurement discipline is concerned. I'm very delighted to welcome Mr. Sam. Mr. Sam serves as the regional director of SIPS across Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. He's leading for procurement values. He had been promoting the profession in the past 10 years in the Middle East precisely. Okay, he has an extensive senior leadership in organizations working in the procurement sector. He champions procurement management as a strategic and business driver. واليوم إن شاء الله حيكون معنا. By the way, he is also a top LinkedIn voice. Top LinkedIn voice. يعني ranked by LinkedIn to be one of the most followed procurement professionals on the Middle East. Correct? Right? Give it up for Mr. Sam Ashampong from SIPS.
Thank you, Sama. Assalamu alaikum. Apologies, I'm going to have to speak in Arabic, in English, sorry, because my Arabic is shway shway. In fact, it's not good at all, so you will thank me for speaking in English. It's a pleasure to be here. My first time in Amman, Jordan. What a fantastic place. Such nice people. I was out last night having shisha and mansaf. There you go, mansaf. Delicious food. It's now my favorite food anywhere. And I think I'll stay. I think I have to stay because they don't have it anywhere else. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's good to have met so many of you so far. Hopefully later on I can get to meet more of you. It's always a pleasure to be amongst procurement people. I will just talk today a little bit about, about procurement leadership and the future of procurement leadership, and create a foundation for some of the speakers that are going to come later. But before I do that, I'll take the opportunity to talk a little bit about SIPS. I myself, I've been a SIPS member for a long time, all of my career. I won't tell you how many years because then you'll know my age, so forget that. But I've been serving as the regional director for SIPS for the last 10 years. I'm from the UK, but I've lived in the UAE for the last 18 years, so I'm very familiar with the region. But in 2015, I took over the permanent role as regional director for the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Australia. So I'm a procurement professional like yourselves. But let me tell you about SIPS a little bit, some things you may not know. We were set up almost 100 years ago, for the specific reason to support everyone here, to support the professionals in procurement, and to promote the profession of procurement and supply chain, to establish purchasing as a proper, recognized profession. That's what SIPS was set up for. So now we work with individuals with certification. We work with companies as well around the world. That's our job. So from 1932, we've gone on to become the biggest, the largest such institute in the world. We operate in more than 181 countries, and we have regional offices around the world in each continent as well. So we work with individuals and companies and governments as well. That's the main thing that we do. But an interesting fact is that one of the main reasons SIPS was set up was because 100 years ago, and this may sound familiar, almost 100 years ago, the US president at the time imposed tariffs on the world. The US president in 1930 decided to impose tariffs on the rest of the world. And one of the reasons SIPS was set up was because a number of procurement professionals got together and they wanted to find a way to navigate around these tariffs, to find solutions around the chaos that tariffs in 1930 created across the world. So that's an interesting fact about how and why SIPS was set up. An interesting fact about tariffs also is that tariffs in 1930 led to what we call the Great Depression. So let's hope that history doesn't repeat itself. That's all I'm going to say about that. Some other things we do around the world is we work with a number of non-government organizations like the United Nations, and more recently with the Gates Foundation on a project called Health Procurement Africa. So what we do with that is we provide training to healthcare professionals in Africa to make sure that they are the very, very best they can be. Because funding for healthcare in developing countries is obviously in short supply. So we want to make sure, or we want to do our bit to make sure that procurement professionals in those countries are able to make sure the funds they have go as far as possible. So we provide that particular project, working with the Gates Foundation to provide healthcare procurement in Africa. So these are some of the things that SIPS do. So that gives a bit of a background, but before I start talking about procurement leadership, let's all get on the same page and agree what is procurement. Because everywhere I go, if I have 5 people sitting around a table, everyone has a different definition as to what procurement is. Okay? And also, some people think anybody can do procurement. And I won't argue with that. But let's just say that procurement is not very complex, to be honest. We all do it. You're buying things, right? It's not really complicated. And some people give a definition of procurement being in the right place at the right time, buying the right quantity, right quality, etc. And that's the definition of procurement. It is, partly. But if it was, then those people over there are procurement professionals. Because they are there at the January sales. They're in the right place at the right time. They get in the right price, so they would be procurement professionals. But it's a little bit more structured, strategic, and complicated than that, probably. And if you look at the definition there, which is the definition I always use, the only thing to notice is that I would say there are certain foundations that everybody needs to know, everyone needs to be proficient at to be called a procurement professional. You have to be very, very knowledgeable about category management. You have to be very, very knowledgeable about contract management. You have to be very, very knowledgeable about supply relationship management, at the minimum. And the reason why is because if you're not fully conversant with just those 3 things, you can never, ever really know that what you're doing is obtaining the lowest total cost of ownership. Because all of those things contribute to making sure that you know you're achieving not the lowest price, but the lowest total cost of ownership. So, talking about those 3 important things, just summarizing quickly, what is supplier relationship management? Basically, it's making sure that you're working with your suppliers in a way that adds benefit to what you're trying to achieve. In in a better way than if you didn't work with them strategically. That sounds very complicated, but what I'm basically saying is that, and obviously you don't practice supplier relationship management with every supplier, it's only your strategic suppliers, okay? So basically, if you do not have a strategic relationship with your key suppliers, then it's very difficult to get value. And let me think of an example. If you are, let me think of some, seeing as I've spoken about US presidents, let me keep being controversial. Let's say if I was Elon Musk and I own Tesla. Well, Tesla produce electric cars. So the suppliers of the batteries of Tesla cars, the company, has to be a strategic supplier. Okay? You cannot have just a normal contract with these suppliers where you just issue a contract, you do a tender every year. You have to have a more strategic relationship with that particular supplier because they're so key to your business. So the way you work with them is a lot different to the supplier of pens, pencils, and toilet paper, whatever, right? So you have to have a strategic relationship with those suppliers. If you do not, then you introduce risk and you introduce complexity and you probably will not get value. So that's what supplier relationship management is in a nutshell. What is category management? Category management is saying that you have to understand for any piece of spend you're making, you have to understand which suppliers you're working with, what the prices are, what the locations are, and make sure you have a coherent strategy around that. Because if you don't, you're not obtaining value. So imagine if in your organization you are buying pens from 10 different companies for 10 different prices, then you don't know whether you're getting value, right? Or even it could be something as simple as maybe you, because of the relationship you have with the company, you have additional warehousing costs or logistics costs because you use different companies. So that's category management. And finally, contract management. Now, in many organizations, procurement professionals believe that the contract is entirely the responsibility of legal. Okay? It's not. It has to be one of our most important skills. Because if we don't understand the legal implications of a contract, then we can't know what the commercial implications are either. And we saw that in COVID. Good old COVID. COVID-19. 2019, yes, that's the clue. We found that in COVID, when many people said to me, Sam, in COVID, the supplier didn't supply my goods. Does that constitute force majeure, which is a contract clause? And I said, well, I don't know. Do you have force majeure in your contract? Because if you don't, then it doesn't. Okay, so you have to understand the consequences of every single clause in your contract, from payment terms, because that all has commercial value. The price that the supplier is providing you is not valid unless it's validated by payment terms, unless it's validated by liability. So in a nutshell, contract management is very important. So those three things, contract management, category management, supplier relationship management, are the basic key terms that a procurement professional needs to fully understand. But we're talking about procurement leadership today. So how do you differentiate yourself? How do you not just know the basics, how do you go from there to be a leader? How do you stand out? How do you add value to your organization and not just save money? You need to know more than that. And for that, we need to look at what are the priorities for procurement as a profession, and what are the priorities for procurement leaders as well. So in 2025, 2026, as we are now, the main priorities, I would say, are these. The number one priority, or the number one piece of knowledge, or the number one skill that procurement leaders need to know is how to manage risk. Why do I say that? I'll come on to it in a second. But it's the number one skill or priority that procurement leaders need to know. The second is you need to understand technology. You need to be very conversant with technology, how technology works. If you're not, that's a risk. You also need to know how to innovate, how to look for business solutions, because that's what your company wants you to do. Procurement professionals are not just there to save money. We're here to bring business solutions to organizations. And finally, one of the priorities for procurement leaders is to be credible, to build credibility. So let's go through those now. So why is it important to manage risk? We found out during COVID and subsequent things that have happened, such as the issues with tariffs right now or geopolitical problems, that the number one priority for anyone who's in a procurement or supply chain space is to just think, is to strategize and think, what if this happened? How would that affect my organization? How would that affect my supply chain? What would I do? What's scenario 1? What's scenario 2? What's scenario 3? How do I manage risk? So for a procurement professional, to manage risk, or procurement leader, becomes the most important thing, because if you don't manage risk, then you stand the risk of something happening that's going to affect your bottom line, and you have not protected your organization against it. And I would go one step further and say that for a procurement leader, if you want to know what defines a procurement or supply chain leader in 2026, it is that the very, very best procurement leaders or supply chain leaders are the ones who you've never heard of. Okay? If you are famous as a chief procurement officer or chief procurement officer, then you're probably not very good. And why do I say that? Because it probably means that people know you because you are the CPO of BMW and all your cars are stuck in the Suez Canal and it's affected the bottom line of your business, and that's why people know you. Or you're the CPO of a wheat company and you no longer have supplies of wheat because of the Russia-Ukraine war and your company has suffered. That's why you're famous. But the procurement and supply chain leaders who have mitigating plans or risk management plans in place already, whereby if something happens, we will immediately do this, and it has no impact on the business, they're not famous at all. Nobody hears about them. And it probably means they are the very, very best leaders. So the number one priority of procurement leaders is to manage risk, because it keeps your business going, it gives you business continuity, and you're adding value continually to your organization. We did a survey in 2025 of procurement leaders to ask, what are the main practices that ensure continuity of supply, that ensure that you keep getting your goods or services in today's world in 2025? And these were the top considerations that some of those procurement leaders gave. And I'll tell you in a second why that's interesting. So first of all, they said, what we do now is we diversify the number of suppliers we have. We have as many suppliers as possible for each commodity. Second of all, we are now getting involved in insourcing. So we're not outsourcing as much as we did before, we're insourcing. We're making goods ourselves. And thirdly, we are holding a lot more stock. Okay, so we're not holding minimum levels of stock anymore, we're holding a lot more stock. I'll tell you why that's interesting to me. Because pre-2019, that was the total opposite of what procurement and supply chain leaders thought. People were single sourcing, which obviously is a risk. People were continually outsourcing. They were outsourcing more and more and more. People were employing just-in-time techniques. And all of these things came crashing to a halt when we had a global pandemic. So it's interesting how the mind shift has happened. And it's 360 degrees, or 180 degrees actually, of a switch. That's very interesting to me, but not really so interesting, because the best practice from procurement hasn't changed, actually, from what SIP says and what any other procurement thought leader says, because nobody ever said you should single source. That's never been a good strategy. So actually, we've gone back to basics. Outsourcing needs to be done when it's relevant, and definitely just in time was not a universal advice for every category of spend. You're definitely not going to use just in time in medical supplies, for example. Okay? So people started adopting just in time techniques, but it wasn't relevant across the board. So it's interesting that that shift has happened, because people are now trying to mitigate risk. The second one is leverage technology. Now, this is an interesting one, because technology can do a lot of things for us in procurement and in business in general. But we're all very frightened of technology. Everyone's scared of technology. Who is not scared of technology here? Okay, so all of you are scared of technology, right? Apart from 2 people here, right? I get you, I understand. People say, will ChatGPT take my job? Will AI take my job? So I understand. I would say, as many people have said recently, yes, AI will take the jobs of people who don't understand AI. The important thing is, we have to embrace technology. It helps us. It automates repetitive tasks. There are many things that human beings in procurement and other disciplines do that can be done much quicker by technology. And that doesn't take away our jobs. It means it leaves us free to do more higher value things. But we have to understand how to use technology. We have to understand how to use data to make sourcing decisions, to look at the data we have, to say, this is how we're going to buy something, this is where we're going to buy it, this is the price, and this is the supplier. Technology can do this for us very fast. We have to understand that. And also, we have to understand what technology systems do. And that's what I mean by utilizing best-of-breed systems. There's no point in going out and saying, this company uses SAP, or this company uses Ariba, or any system, therefore I'm going to just use that as well. You have to understand what your company needs specifically and use technology to do that. So you have to understand how technology works all the time. Because if you don't, you can get left behind. Because if you look at how procurement sits now in 2025 to 2026, the reality is that many tasks that were once done by procurement professionals are now done by technology, to the extent that the vast majority of chief procurement officers say that by the end of the year, they will have full automation in many elements of procurement and supply. In fact, not just these, but a lot more. So we need to really understand what technology can do, and then we need to focus on the things that technology cannot do. So, relationship management, risk management, supplier relationships, ethics, all of these things are heavily focused on human beings being able to do it. So let's do what we can do very, very well, and let technology do the rest. Let the machines do the work, let the humans do the thinking. But we have to understand what technology can do. Finally, number 3, we need to innovate. So we really need to understand that our company wants us to look for business solutions. Our company wants us to come up with the solutions to the problems within the organization through sourcing. We need to understand our stakeholders. We need to understand ESG or sustainability. Very, very important. Sustainability itself is a very strong subject, but it's tightly wound into procurement and sourcing. Because what we buy has an effect on not just our bottom line in terms of money, but it has an effect on people, and it has an effect on the environment. And what you'll find is that it's no longer acceptable for you to procure something in 2026 in an unsustainable way, because it will affect the brand of your company. So we have to understand what sustainability means and what ethics means. But first of all, when I talk about stakeholder focus, something that always makes me smile is this, is that you can imagine, let me just think of a stakeholder here, your marketing stakeholder, okay? So you're in procurement, you have a marketing department. And your marketing department, their main requirement is when they need a supplier, they need to do it very, very fast. Okay, they have a PR campaign, they have a marketing campaign, they need to do it very, very fast. And you can imagine how they feel when their procurement department says, but if we're going to tender, that will take 3 months. Okay? That's not stakeholder focus. That's not us understanding our stakeholders. And I always use this example of the Formula One. Does anyone familiar with the Formula One, the car racing? Formula One provides the best example of stakeholder management that I know in the world. Because in Formula One, what happens is these cars drive round the tracks at 200 miles an hour, okay? And at some point, they will need tires or fuel. Not so much fuel anymore, to be fair, but they will have to stop at what they call the pits. But the important thing is, before they stop, the people there waiting for them know exactly what they need. And as soon as they stop, what they need is provided within seconds and they go. But sometimes, in procurement, we don't understand our stakeholder. And what that could look like in Formula One terms is, you arrive at the pit in your car, and the guy says, okay, what do you want? I want fuel. What fuel? Diesel. We don't have that. That will take another 10 minutes. Okay, wait. What tires do you want? I need these tires. Okay, you didn't tell us, so that's going to take us 10 minutes. You're not delivering what's needed at the time that it's actually needed. And the result of that would be that the car will lose the race. Okay, so it's just outcome-based. So it's our responsibility to understand what stakeholders need and when, and make adjustments accordingly, not the other way around. So that's what I mean by understanding your stakeholders. And as far as sustainability is concerned, we have to understand that sustainability, or an understanding of environmental and social concerns, are here to stay. We cannot avoid them. The definition of sustainability is the ability to meet the needs of today without affecting the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So in other words, I can't source something today that is going to kill the planet. Okay? I have a responsibility not to do that. So every sourcing decision has to take that into account. But sustainability also includes ethical behavior. And being ethical is not a nice to have. It's essential because it costs money. We say that corruption adds 10% to the cost of doing business. So corruption costs money. Okay? And actually, it costs 25% in developing countries. So in countries that need it the most, it's more expensive to do things because of ethical behavior. So from a procurement perspective, this is actually a very, very high priority to us because it costs money. So that's important as well. And finally, as I wrap up, as procurement professionals, it's important for us to have credibility. If you're in a room with your CEO or whoever it is, with your other peers, your head of finance and your head of marketing or head of HR, and they are all professionals in their field, your finance guy is ACCA, whatever qualification. It's very important for credibility for them to see you as a professional in what you do as well. Which is why it's important to have these certifications that show that you also are a professional on the same footing as all these other people. That's what credibility is about. You need to build your brand so that as a procurement professional, people want to come to you. You don't want to be in an organization where people only come to procurement because it says in the policy that at some point procurement have to sign it off. How many organizations have that policy? Only one? No, you're lying. How many organizations have a mandate that you have to go to procurement to buy anything? 2, 3. So in all your other organizations, you don't have to go to procurement, or you do? Delegation of authority, right, okay. The best scenario, or the best advert to show you're doing the right thing, is if stakeholders voluntarily come to you and say, please, can you procure or source this? It shows you're adding value to the organization. It shows it's not a compliance thing, it's a value thing. And that's where you want to be. So if I just summarize, what are the priorities for procurement going forward, and as far as procurement leaders are concerned? You need to be digitally connected. You need to understand what digital means. You need to understand what technology brings. You need to move away from the thinking that you're here to bring cost savings. We don't want to continue to use a language to say, well, I've saved 100 million. It loses its value with an organization. You need to be able to show what value you've added. Okay, you saved 100 million on this contract, but you saved 100 million buying pens, but did the organization buy double the amount of pens as they did last year? Then you haven't saved anything. You need to be able to quantify what's happened, the effect on the organization. You need to ensure that your supply chains are resilient, so when something happens, you have a plan B. If you procure from a factory in Brazil, and it's your single factory that you procure your most critical items from, then, I say Brazil, it could be any country, and it's a single factory, then you already have a risk. Because if something happens to that factory, what's your plan B? So you need to make sure you have resilient supply chains. You need to have an absolute commitment to ethics, as we know. You need to source innovation. And you need to try and manage and anticipate risk. Risk being the number one consideration for procurement professionals. As I said, no one wants to be famous. Don't be famous as a procurement and supply chain professional. No one needs to know your name. Okay? No one knows your name. You're doing a brilliant job. Trust me. So, in summary, in my kind of last couple of slides, procurement leadership needs to evolve, because if it doesn't, there are two faces that can emerge. You can either look like the human, or you can look like the kind of robot there. Because in reality, technology can do so much now that human beings are almost having to prove their worth again. Okay? And there are certain things that technology can do better than us. There's no point us trying to, compete. But there are things that technology can't. Emotional intelligence, relationships. There's a lot of things in procurement that only humans can do. That's what we need to focus on. Don't worry about, let the machines do the hard work. Let us translate that into strategies. Because if we don't do that, then, and we don't redefine the profession, the borderlines become very blurred as to what values we're adding. And there are individuals who are already doing that. I call them the CPO to CEO crowd. There are a number of people who were procurement leaders who are now CEOs. And they've proved they've got what I call a procurement brand. The most famous one is this guy, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. He was a procurement guy. He was their head of supply chain. Okay? He was able to demonstrate value and is now the CEO of the organization. Because he always delivered value, not cost savings. He was relevant at an organization level. And there are many others. So the skills, the top skills needed for procurement leaders in this day and age, interestingly, are not negotiation skills. That's not there. That is a given. Obviously, you need to know how to negotiate. But you definitely need to have influencing skills. You need to be able to influence your stakeholders. You need to be able to manage your stakeholders. You definitely need to know how to manage risk. You need to have information or digital systems knowledge. And finally, you need to be credible. People need to trust you. They need to believe that you know what you're doing to add value to an organization. You need to be credible. SIPs can help you do that. As you know, we work with organizations and individuals, and those people who are on their journey to become MSIPs, I know many of you are, that's where credibility comes from. And if you need any more information on that, my good friend Sama from Mohacat can help you. Thank you very much.